Consider this a professional courtesy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with The Rebel Broker, licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to the middle of the week, everyone. Just to let you know, I have gone ahead and done the drawing for the $50 Amazon gift card. I haven't yet sent the email out. I did this. The cutoff time was what? I think we decided yesterday at 5. So went ahead and did that, and I will be sending out an email today, Wednesday, to the person who won. So hopefully when you submitted yours, you made sure to use an email address you check. If I don't hear back, I'll be doing another drawing, but odds are the person will be on the other end, so congrats to that person. Good luck to those of you who are still hanging in there. We will be doing this again next month, and of course, we're doing this $50 Amazon gift card drawing at 10, at least in the first half of each month, and we've been doing it now forever, so lots more opportunities for folks to take advantage of this. I'm going to start making this a little bit more interesting as we go forward. I've come up with some other cool ways to potentially make it a little bit more interesting in terms of what you can get out of the drawing. So keep tuned in for that. As always, the best way to get in contact with me is through the website. The website is therebelbroker.com. Feel free to head on over. While you're there, why not submit your name for the $50 Amazon gift card drawing? To do that, click the big red button at the top of the page titled Take the Survey to Support the Show. You'll be given an opportunity to enter your email address twice. Make sure to use the same email address both times. Then you answer a handful of demographic questions, and you are done. You're entered in. If I do draw you, I will be reaching out to you via the email address you provide. That's why it's so very important for you to use an email address that you check on at least a regular basis, enough that you're going to get that message within 48 hours of me sending it, because if after 2 days I don't get a response, I go ahead and move on and draw a new name. So please keep that in mind with whatever email address that you submit. Good luck to you. Thanks. And the other thing is you're helping support the show. That's the other great part. And that's one reason why we do the drawing, is you're going to the trouble of helping them support the show. So I want to try to give a little bit back and hand out a $50 Amazon gift card to lucky winners on a monthly basis. Good luck to those of you who are still waiting in the wings to win that $50, and congrats to the folks who've already won. Also, if you want to join the Rebel Underground, best way to do that is to text the word Rebel Broker, the number 44222. That's text the word Rebel Broker, all one word, to the number 44222. Or while you're at the site doing the big red button thing, you could also click on one of the many links on the page to join the Rebel Underground. Okay. Couple of very interesting ones. We've talked about what I think is going to be an interesting thing in the world of employment, how the landscape of what people do to earn money is really going to be impacted by automation of all kinds. We've talked about self-driving cars. We've talked about the fast food industry, which is interesting because, that's where people learn how to be an employee, right? That's usually one of their first experiences. But not just fast food, all kinds of jobs that tend to be entry-level jobs are going to lean more towards getting automated, as it becomes more financially viable to do it that way than to pay an actual person to do the work. And we've talked about how that might affect the landscape of real estate. Now, obviously, that's a little bit more of a long-term thing, but it's also creeping up pretty quickly. It's not as far out as I think a lot of people are estimating. We had some people estimating we wouldn't see automated cars on the road till 2030. Now we're already seeing folks, companies doing cross-country truck runs with automated pilots. So I think we're a lot closer. I think it wouldn't surprise me if by 2020 we have regular automated runs being done, and that's going to completely take a chunk out of the number of folks employed to drive trucks. On the upside, we'll be cutting 3 days off of the cross-country travel, so it'll only be 2 days for that stuff to make it across. But unfortunately, we're probably going to see a substantial drop in the number of folks employed in that area. And of course, that's just that market, right? There's a whole bunch of other areas where this is going to take effect too. The reason I bring this up is there was an article that came out recently from the Denver Post, and it was in their real estate section, and the title was "A Driverless Future May Upend the Time-Tested Real Estate Law of Location, Location, Location." And I thought, That was a very interesting observation to make. And as someone who looks out for the world of real estate, trying to figure out where the big news items are coming from, and to help you sort of spot on the horizon or maybe just over the horizon trends that might affect your investments, I thought this fit in well with that, because I'm not 100% sure this is true. Location is still always going to be a huge part. How you get there and don't get there is an important element. But what's actually important here is I think that for those folks who have a great real estate property right now, I don't think this affects you at all. I think you continue to have a great property for all the reasons, whether it's commute related or anything else. What's interesting, though, is it's going to definitely enhance the mushroom effect that we've talked about before. Now, what's the mushroom effect? For new listeners, I'm almost sure I kind of just came up with this. I'm not going to claim credit for it because who knows? Maybe I heard someone else say it and I'm using it. But my mushroom theory is that when the market gets too nuts, your neck as an investor, what you want to do is you want to look at the areas that are sort of in the shadow of that area. So when we were talking about San Francisco and we were starting to see things peak, before that peak came, we were suggesting here on this show that smart investors should be looking for communities that are more affordable just outside of San Francisco, but close enough that it's a reasonable commute or a reality that folks will be willing to commute from those areas into San Francisco. And sure enough, what we saw was huge growth in desirability, demand, prices for all of these communities outside of San Francisco as things got more and more crazy, even to the point where the level of demand in San Francisco kind of peaked out at a point where we were seeing prices not really growing a whole lot for a period of time. And that was the theory, right? Well, what happens when that dynamic gets changed, right? Because the real dynamic there is my commute, right? If you're sitting there trying to drive and it's taking you an hour to get where you're going, and that's a huge pain, well, that's the deciding factor, right? We talked the other day when we were discussing some of the ups and downs of Stockton and other areas where folks would drive 2 hours each way to get to work, which is nuts to me, but it's a reality for a lot of folks simply to improve the affordability of their month-to-month expenses. Now imagine if you lived in a scenario where that 2 hours was no longer wasted time. What if that commute time turned into time where you're not focusing on the road, you're not putting on your turn signal, you're not merging left or right, you're literally have a little desk in front of you, you can have your laptop open, you can check your phone. Now, of course, this depends on what you do for a living. I know a lot of folks here, though, that probably turns their day from a 2-hour commute to work and a 2-hour commute from work back home, and then 8 hours sitting at your desk at work into 4 hours sitting at your desk at work, 2 hours sitting at your desk in the car as you commute, and another 2 hours at your desk in the car as you commute home, right? This is going to be particularly true for folks who will get a lot of their work done on the computer, whether you're talking about programmers or project managers or product managers or whatever else. There's a nice long list of jobs, particularly here in the Bay Area, that feed that, right? So suddenly that becomes productive time. It becomes time that you can be doing other things. Now, if your thing is you paint houses for a living, all right, so it maybe becomes productive time for you to manage billing or do other things that are sort of aside from painting a house, but you still need to spend that time painting a house. At least it still turns that time into something productive, and that's really overall the point they're trying to make here. Now, to sort of lay out what some folks are saying. Now, Medium.com has got an article out that's interesting where they talk about this a little bit, and they do some of the basic stuff we've already sort of chatted about, but they get down to some nitty gritty here, which I think is interesting. The shift to driverless cars may represent a sea change in consumer behavior, but in some ways represents only a stepwise change in vehicle design. Yet small disruptions in the way we use vehicles, ride sharing, for instance, has incredible potential to cause change far and wide. While ride sharing services Uber and Lyft are deploying automated vehicles in meaningful ways, research shows that every ride sharing vehicle put into use takes 9 to 13 cars off the street. Despite a relatively low overall penetration, to date, only about 15% of all adults have used a ride-sharing service. Now, it goes on to try to estimate what kind of an effect autonomous vehicles would have on real estate. It's estimated that self-driving vehicles could eventually cut urban automobile numbers by up to 90%. By its very nature, this is certain to catalyze a complete repurposing of the existing real estate landscape, and change will happen everywhere. So let's take that one first. I think that's an interesting point. I think that their estimate of how much it would cut urban automobiles, urban may be true, right? Really hardcore downtown stuff might be true, but I don't think it's going to cut it as much as they think. And I think the other element here, in terms of real change, I don't think, even if that's true, even if we do see urban automobile numbers getting cut by 90%, I don't see that affecting negatively anything real estate related in an urban environment. The reasons why people live in urban areas, you're in an urban thing because your job is near the urban thing, right? So there's already not really as much of a challenge to why you live where you live. The idea that automated vehicles would really change the urban dweller, I think, is very different. What really happens here is it opens up the folks in the outer areas, the suburban areas, the bedroom communities. I think it widens the circle in terms of folks being willing to move further away from their job if that commute remains usable time for them. So I think that's important, but also here's the other part. Right now in the Bay Area, if you live in Morgan Hill, which is considered a bedroom community, I think something like this would have a gigantic effect. And what's great is it has a positive effect. I think it turns places like Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, which are, as you leave the epicenter of Silicon Valley, that's what you hit. You leave San Jose going south, you hit Morgan Hill, then you hit San Martin, then you hit Gilroy. You keep going, you're going to hit Watsonville, you're going to hit other cities down there. But it makes the desirability of those areas far more interesting because, A, you achieve usable time, depending on what your job is, right? But here's the other part. Because there will be this automated driving ride-sharing thing happening, and I don't think, in a suburban environment, we're not going to see anywhere near a 90% drop in the number of cars. But there's two things that happen with automated driving that make that, not only does it make that commute now useful, it makes that commute shorter. One, it cuts the number of cars that are going to be on the road by some percentage, 10%, 15%, 5%. It's going to improve things at least by that much. But here's the other thing. We here in California have commuter lanes. Commuter lanes are suddenly going to become automated vehicle only lanes. My guess is not only will there be one lane for automated vehicles only, but it'll be 2 lanes for automated vehicles only. The state is going to want to push the automated vehicle dynamic huge. Why? Because it fits in with what we see from government, right? If you automate vehicles, that gives the state more control over what happens with vehicles because they can simply regulate what the automated car makers can and can't do, what those rules do. It makes them feel more in control, right? Because you're no longer driving. And if the mechanical software part of it is in charge, and since the government can influence what that does, that's going to make them feel good. So they're going to feel better about that. Of course, they're going to have statistics to point to that it's far safer to have an automated vehicle, which statistically it will be. And here's the other thing. Those automated vehicles will be able to move faster, more consistently, because you're not going to have human people doing that stupid merge into the fast lane thing without a turn signal, right? It's all going to be automation controlled. So what you'll see is, you're not going to get that guy who flashes his brights at you when you try to get into the commuter lane to block you from doing it. It just isn't going to happen. There aren't going to be humans in there doing that. So suddenly you're going to find that these automated vehicles are not only going to benefit from their own lanes, they're going to benefit from being able to drive at faster speeds because it's automated. They're keeping a regular distance away from one another. They're all agreeing electronically on a speed. It's all going to not only reduce the amount of traffic that's being faced, it's going to make the traffic you do face in an automated scenario go faster. That's pretty amazing. And that makes all the properties that you own. Let's say you're someone who owns an investment property and you're just that one city too far. Whatever the quote unquote acceptable commute is in your area. And hopefully you know this. You've looked at the statistics for your area and you know what folks are willing to tolerate in terms of commutes. And you've picked a sweet spot, right? Let's say you've picked the 45-minute sweet spot. And that in this area, that's a pretty reasonable sweet spot. And so you made sure to buy all of your investment properties within this 45-minute drive of the epicenter of why people live where you are, right? Whether it's because that's where the auto plant is, or because that's where all the high-tech stuff is, or whatever, right? The big draw. What you're going to find is that suddenly your property becomes more desirable because more people are willing to move out further, because now the negative side of commuting is reduced by this autonomous vehicle dynamic that's coming into the marketplace. I think the only possible negative effect for folks that already have really great rentals in an urban area, or that already are dynamic, is what you're going to see is the potential for more realistic competition from further away properties, because people aren't as put off by the commute anymore. It makes it less of a worry. However, for those of you that are really situated in those urban environments, I don't think it changes things at all, because I think folks still want to be real close to the quick food, to a bunch of different types of experiences that you tend to get in a more urban setting. So I think this is all potentially going to be a boon for real estate. I think it's going to make a lot of these things that make it important for folks to live much closer to work less important. However, one thing I think they see, which is, and maybe I can just read what they say here. Consider the effect on retail and the way we shop. Demand for parking lots in the United States, in one example, could be cut in half over the next 30 years as a result of widespread AV adoption. This change in isolation would free up 75 billion square feet of space. Put in context, more than the combined area of all office, apartment, shopping mall, strip mall, and warehouse area in the nation today, which is kind of an interesting point to make. Let's see. Car ownership, and I actually kind of disagree with them on this one. Car ownership, an iconic staple of U.S. American lifestyle, may also see major changes. It becomes largely outmoded. Presented with the opportunity to rent a seat in a moving vehicle that cheaply, automatically, reliably, and individually delivers you to your destination, drivers across all socioeconomic strata will certainly begin to question the value of a proposition of owning a car and the expenses it entails. Lower vehicle ownership means fewer cars on the road, which means a drastic reduction in parking needs. Do I see this being a dynamic? Sort of. I think in an urban setting, you see far less emphasis on needing a car. There's already a far less emphasis, but I think it accentuates that. I also know that a lot of people enjoy their private time in their vehicle. I know I do. Am I a pig for loving that? I do. So when the automation wave comes, I'm not going to jump into a car with other people. I'm probably going to buy my own automated vehicle and ride in that. So maybe that makes me part of the problem, but that's the way I feel about it. And I think a lot of other people will feel the same way. For anybody who's ever ridden public transportation, there's something not as great about traveling just with yourself. Now, in my case, you'd probably have the family car. So instead of having two cars, maybe you only have the one car, because now in an automated fashion, the car is going to take the kids to school. It's going to drop off your partner at their job, and it's going to take you to your job. Then it's going to go park itself somewhere. Maybe you then take advantage of the number of folks who don't mind traveling with others, and you rent your car out to the grid to give people rides. So your car maybe pays for itself. Whatever is being charged for folks to get from A to B, your car's out there doing it. And then when it's time to pick you and the kids up, it comes and it gets you and it meets you at the usual spot, picks you up, picks up your partner, picks up the kids, whatever, right? So all of that becomes just an automatic thing that happens every day. But the net result for real estate is the footprint gets bigger, right? If they're right about this, there becomes greater opportunities to develop more real estate for housing on areas that used to accommodate vehicles in the urban areas. And I think that's a very real probability. And then out in the suburban areas, it simply makes those areas more attractive, again, because the whole commute thing becomes less of a pain in the butt and more of a time for you to actually do stuff. If you want to do the Leave It to Beaver version of that kind of travel, maybe you've got the equivalent of an automated minivan and it's family time. It's maybe you even have breakfast on your way while you're driving. There's a lot of different ways you could make that time for the family to be sitting together and discussing things while you're on your way to go on with the rest of your day. Or it's time for everyone to pop out their computer, for the kids to finish that last bit of homework, for you to finish that last presentation in PowerPoint, whatever. So I think that's all. I think all of that's interesting. Not quite buying into this idea that so many people are going to abandon car ownership, but I think it's absolutely an interesting point to make. Okay. Next on today's show, I wanted to discuss a very interesting stat relating to San Francisco. Fits in very well with stuff we've talked about before. It might just blow your mind, so don't go away. We're going to talk about that next.
Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909.
Welcome back, everyone. We just covered the world of self-driving cars and what some effects we could likely expect those to have on real estate. I think we covered some good information there. And the bottom line is, for those of you that are having these properties that are sort of resting right on the outer edges of the commute circle from a popular area, I think you're just going to find the popularity of your property grows as this phenomenon grows. Now, next, as I teased just before the break, very interesting data to come out relating to San Francisco, described as experiencing a, quote, mass exodus. And it's interesting to look at this from a bunch of different angles because, it's interesting to understand what causes this stuff. Now, you may remember from the news reports that San Francisco is a sanctuary city. They've seen a lot of folks who fall into the category of being undocumented aliens going to the city. You may have read other things relating to there being a very big homeless problem, a lot of human waste being dropped onto very public areas. In fact, even some of the more Tony areas where really big companies exist, they are discovering they have to have people go out there and wash the cement in front of their entrances to get rid of some of the human waste that's out there. I have clients who work for some very big tech firms up in San Francisco, where literally they have to step over it. If they're getting there early, they have to step over the stuff that normally you and I would flush down the toilet. So that's a problem. Now, the article states, for the first time in decades, more people are leaving San Francisco than there are new people moving into the city. This mass exodus has propelled the Bay Area to the nation's leading city for out-migration. What's interesting is the folks who are doing the leaving are the folks who are also the folks you want to keep in a city. They tend to be the biggest contributors to the tax base. They tend to be the folks who own a property. Now, from a real estate standpoint, that's good news because these folks are going to be selling properties, which would help to feed the inventory, which might help to bring down prices depending on how many buyers there are for that market. San Francisco always seems to have a pretty decent number of buyers for the market. But this latest data sure does point to the idea that we shouldn't be optimistic that we're going to see a lot of growth in San Francisco over the new year if this trend continues. One of the reasons for the exodus is the cost of living in San Francisco. According to the Mercury News, the median price for homes in Silicon Valley fall anywhere between $800,000 and to more than $1.4 million. That's compared to the U.S. average of $206,000. So we've already talked about this before. The prices in San Francisco have been crazy. In terms of cities that absolutely need a mass exodus or an out-migration, San Francisco should be at the top of that list. San Francisco has also become one of the most progressive cities in the nation over the last few decades, culturally and politically, meaning liberal policies rule the day. The city is also heavily taxed. Now, that's another thing. When I I don't do day-to-day business in San Francisco. I frequently talk to folks who either own property in San Francisco as investments, or I will, from time to time, talk to former clients who have moved up there and own. I have two clients who moved up there in 2012, I think. I've got several more over the years that reach out to me and we chat on a regular basis. And they are very much interested in leaving. They're not interested in living in the city anymore. They used to very much enjoy their views of the bay and the bridge and all the stuff that the city had to offer. But over the last couple of decades, it's become insane in terms of what they have to deal with on a daily basis. Now, another large contributor to the problem is the city's sanctuary city policy. It was the center of a national controversy after an undocumented immigrant murdered Kate Steinle in 2015. Steinle's killer had been convicted of multiple felonies and deported from the U.S. 5 times before he shot and killed Steinle. He found safe harbor in San Francisco thanks to the city's policy that prevents law enforcement from working with federal immigration authorities. Now, why is this brought up? Well, because folks who are leaving are stating that that's one of the reasons why they want out of the city. The Mercury News noted that while tens of thousands of residents are leaving San Francisco, tens of thousands of immigrants are moving there. Quote, between July 2015 and July 2017, the region gained 44,732 immigrants, but lost 44,102 residents to other parts of California and the country. According to the regional think tank, the population drops have been most notable on residents between the ages of 18 and 24 and between 45 and 64. It's not clear how many immigrants moving to the city are in the U.S. illegally. Residents are saying, and this is what informs it, right? And we as investors who are looking for markets, it's interesting what the people say. There was a person talked to, Carol Dabbick, a retired engineer, lived in the area for 40 years. Now she's moving to Tennessee, one of our favorite areas, right? Chattanooga, Tennessee. That's my go-to. Memphis is also hot on the list. I'm sure that's probably closer to where she's moving, but who knows? Quote, I loved it here when I first got here. I really loved it here, but it's just not the same. We don't like it here anymore. We don't like this sanctuary state status, and just the politics here are crazy. So what do we learn from this? You need to figure out in terms of your market, right? Because this isn't Robert telling you whether you should or shouldn't invest in San Francisco because of these policies. I don't invest in San Francisco for a number of reasons. One, I think that the bang for the buck is idiotic. I don't think there's, and all the numbers show it, right? Whenever we've talked about numbers where we rank cities by return on investment, San Francisco is almost always at the very bottom of the list. You're spending too much and making too little compared to the investment. We can all talk about it costing $4,000 to rent a place in San Francisco, but when you realize that place costs you $1.4 million, you realize, well, that's not positive cash flow unless you put an awful lot of cash into it. And so the money you have to put into it to make a positive cash flow means your return on that cash investment is ridiculously low compared to almost anywhere else in the entire freaking country. So it just doesn't make any real good sense. Now, what's the transferability of this knowledge? Well, take the political temperature. This is where politics can play in. If you live in an area where the politics of your region are increasingly annoying residents, you as an investor should be aware of that. If you live in a place where there's suddenly a big shift in the politics, you should look for the probability that folks are going to leave. You should be plugged into that. What's one reason why I think being plugged into what the political tempo of a community is good, so that when it starts to shift and change, you can decide whether or not that equals more renters for you or fewer. Does it mean more potential buyers when you do that flip, or does it not, right? Does it equal less? Because you want to make your investment strategies work in any environment. We talk about all that. We talk about whether or not a property is desirable or not based on its location. We talked about the cool things that draw people to certain areas. And one of those things is the system that they live under. If it's oppressive from a tax standpoint, if there's a huge amount of interference in people's day-to-day lives. There are communities here that are insane. If you want to do even the most basic remodel in some communities in my area, you have to get a permit for that stuff. And it's frustrating because it's just more obstacles put in front of people. It potentially feeds a drive towards folks wanting to move out of that area. Now, is San Francisco going to get to the point where everybody's leaving? Well, it could. It's not like this hasn't happened in the past. When we have seen areas really hit a low point in terms of what's going on in the city, and I think back to New York in the 1970s, right, when the area around Times Square was all strip clubs and bars, and just if you go look at pictures from the 70s, Times Square was a creepy area for a long time. Really horrible crime rates, all types of stuff, and folks just didn't want to live down there. And then it got rejuvenated. San Francisco is now at the point where you have an awful lot of folks who have a lot of equity in their properties and who make a really good living who are being forced to tolerate some pretty nasty circumstances. And I'll be honest with you. Now, I was born in San Francisco. I was raised here. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for San Francisco. I think and I'm also a history guy. So, I mean, there's a lot of cool things about San Francisco. But I got to tell you, I've also been lucky enough to travel some other places in the world. And the only other place I can think of that I've been that reminds me of the amount of time you have to spend avoiding human waste is when I was in some areas of North Africa where sewers were sort of the puddles that run down the sides of the road. And at least you can argue there, well, that's necessity. In order for those folks to manage their waste, that has to exist. But when you're in San Francisco and there's people sleeping on the street who are taking a dump right there in front of the front door to your apartment complex, and there's a bathroom a block down the street, arguments are hard to make on that one. So, and I hear this from folks frequently, whether they're folks who visited San Francisco and were shocked, or they're folks who moved there and are now kind of wondering if that was the right call to make. Being plugged into all those kinds of things, the level of dissatisfaction among residents within any community is going to be a key thing for you as an investor, whether you're looking at whether or not it's the right time for you to sell that property or time to start looking for one in that property, because maybe things are politically changing in a direction that's likely going to draw more people. So keep all that stuff in mind. I hope this has been a valuable one for you today, folks. As always, the goal is to leave more useful knowledge nuggets there for you than the time you invested. Hope we've achieved that today. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you all next time.